Hey, one thing I'd like to maybe have everybody do through the chat, because I like to try to adjust this quick 30-minute training based off of everybody's needs. And I know many of you, I've dealt with many of you that are on this webinar, but I was wondering if many of you have used IAB before. Are you looking for this to be like just maybe some tips and tricks, or is this something you've never used and just want to understand what the type of software it is? So I don't know if you would just want to unmute real quick or just speak up or type something in the chat, because I'm going to try to go pretty quick because I have to do this within 30 minutes. I'd like to have an idea if you guys have used IAB before, or is this something totally new for you guys? So I'll just give you a second while I bring up IAB. So I'm going to bring up IAB. Okay. So yeah, for IAB has changed a lot. We've added a lot more features recently. So I'm just going to go through and utilize it the way I do. It's not the only way. There's a lot of different ways of doing it. But when you first launch IAB, you actually come up with a start page, and I'm going to launch that right now. So this is the start page of IAB. So you can go new project, existing project, or pick ones you've worked with before. I always just do new project, and then you can enter in the project name. And I'm just going to do this as webinar demo. And at this point, you can actually pick on the left-hand side what type of project you're going to begin with. I usually do not pick anything here initially. I just hit OK and move right into the application, because I'm not always sure what I want to do. Do I want to start with a blank project or do something with hardware and network? So I just go ahead and hit OK. The reason why I do that is as you start maybe adding a controller, then adding an HMI, and then adding a drive, you got to know where to start to add different objects into your project. So here's on the screen with the IAB with no project loaded. As you can see, I can kind of poke my way around within IAB, but I really can't do anything. If you say, well, how do I add a controller to this? And you say, I want to add a 55 or an L71. I try to drag, nothing happens because you have not started anything. This is just the basic screen. So if I go up and go Action, Add New Hardware, I can click on it. Then it brings up a list of the hardware I want to add into my project, from controllers to the Micro 800 to the Micrologics, the SLICs to the PLCs, all of our I/O, safety, motion drives, standalone drives, our HMI and industrial computer line, Armor Shark, you name it, I can add it into these projects. And what this is designed to do is create first of all, a bill of material for you, but also help you determine if your configuration is functional. Meaning if you've got a limitation on, let's say you pick an L16 controller, which is limited to only 4 Ethernet IP nodes. Well, if you try to add 5 IP nodes onto your little network, it'll give you some warnings and red flags because you've gone beyond the capacity of the controller. Or if you have a controller that's only limited to, let's say, 8 modules onto the side, and you try to put 9 modules or 10 modules onto the side, it'll tell you can't do that. Or specifically in compact logics, there are certain modules have to be a certain distance away from the controller. They cannot be more than, let's say, 4 slots away from the controller. But it'll also tell you and warn you that you can't do that also. So it's very useful on configuring systems and making sure you have all the right pieces parts for a project. End caps, terminal blocks, you name it, it's automatically added there for you. So I'm just going to do, just initially, I'm going to go to the 5370, which is a compact logics. You can leave it as a default name, or you could add it, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to do an L30ER, just for conversation's sake. Hit OK. If you notice right here on the screen, I've got my workspace now. It says I've got a Compact Logix L30ER in the upper left. Middle of the screen, I've got a processor, or I've got a power supply and 2 slots. And the bottom, it's already highlighted Compact Logix, and here's all my Compact Logix devices that I could possibly drag up and drop into this rack. So let's say I know I need to put a processor and maybe 5 or 6 I/O modules. I can right-click on the image, hit Configure Chassis, and I can say, you know what, I want 2 slots to the left of the power supply and maybe 5 slots to the right. I can add different banks, 1, 2, or 3 banks by changing this number. And I can always look to see how much my power supply is being consumed if I have to change my power supply to maybe a PA2 to a PA4. So I'm just going to hit OK at this point, and now my rack has changed. So now I'm going to go on the left-hand side and say, you know what, I'm going to drag and drop a controller over there. But let's say I grab a different controller. An L24 will not work in this configuration. If you notice, it's got just a circle with an X on it. So it says it's not allowed in this platform. So if I go down to the right controller, L30, click an L30ER, drag it up, I got a little plus in slot 0. If I try to put it in slot 1, it doesn't work. Okay, so it knows I have to drop it in there. There's my controller. Now I can go down, scroll down a little bit. It has my I/O modules. Since I'm in Compact Logix, it also has the 5069 Compact. If for some reason I accidentally go in there, hit, and I say, okay, I'm going to drag this up into it. Well, obviously, it's not going to allow me to do that because it's the wrong I/O platform. Go back to 1769 I/O, go to digital inputs, and I want to drop a IQ16 into place, and I've got 1. Now I could go down here. Let's say I need 4 of those modules. Go down, grab, drag up, let go. Go down, click, drag up, let go. It's kind of tedious when you have a lot of them. So I'm just going to right click and remove module to show you a little of a shortcut. If I hover over the module that I want, hold down the control key, which I'm doing right now, and then left mouse click, it grabs it, and now I can just click as I'm still holding the control key. I can go right down the path and just click it each one. So it's a nice way to copy and paste without going down, dragging up, go back and forth. I can hold down the control key, select the module I want, and then just keep clicking the same left mouse key and put it into place. So that's a nice shortcut when you're adding multiple modules. So I went ahead and added, let's say I did this accidentally and I want this one here. I can just click and hold with my left mouse, drag it over and let it go, and I can move it into the right location. So now I want to add some output module, let's say an OB16. And then I want to go down and add an OW16. Pretty soon, if I keep adding these modules, I'm going to start seeing a whole bunch of red over here on the right-hand side because I'm going to overtax this existing power supply. And I'm on the far end, right-click, I can hit Insert Empty Slot. I'm just adding more slots so I can drag and drop. If I go in here and try to right-click, Insert More, I can't do any more. The main reason is this controller is limited to, 8 modules. So just in order to get what I'm trying to do, I'm going to remove modules. And there. What I did is I had now 4 IB16s and 4 OW16s. If you notice over here on the right-hand side, my power supply is now overtaxed. I'm now in the negative. So if I go back to right-click, when I'm on the image, Control Chassis, I've got additional errors here. If I switch it over to a PA4 power supply, it says I'm okay. So now I know that I'm okay with that power supply. Hit OK. So it is easily configured. If I go up to this little icon here, it says Quick Bill of Materials. It gives me a list of all the bill of materials that's on this, the processor, the I/O modules, the end cap. If it's preferred and it's active, it'll tell you if there's a product you drag and drop up here that's maybe going obsolete or on end of life. It'll tell you that also, so you know if you're using one of our later products. Really nice. So now I'll give you a bill of material of the image that you are looking for. So now let's go ahead, before I keep going, any questions at all? Okay. So let's say I want this to go out and communicate to some point I/O also. So I can go up to Action, Add New Hardware, go down and select point I/O, and I'm just going to leave the default name, hit OK. So now it comes up with 4 slots and a power supply to power this with 24 volts. This image at the bottom is now switched over to the distributed I/O tab. I can go down and hit point I/O, go to communications adapter. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop a communications adapter up there into the first slot. Now let's say I need to add a couple DC modules, AC modules, etc. So now I can scroll down to I/O modules. I can go to digital. I have my 4-slot, 8-slot, or 4-channel, 8-channel modules. So I'm going to grab a couple 4-channel modules, or excuse me, 8-channel modules. Now, the way this works, if you guys have not used point I/O before, you have a limitation of how many I/O modules you can put on the adapter until you have to put a field bus module in there. You know, if you didn't have the software, you have to manually calculate that. Well, here I can keep adding modules, and it'll throw in all the additional modules to bring in a new power as needed. So I'm just going to right-click on this and go to Configure Chassis. I'm going to add more I/O modules. And I'm going to take off this power supply and not use the 1794. I'm just going to uncheck that. So that goes away. So I'm going to add a IB8. And let's say now I want to go down, add an OB8 module. And I'm going to add, let's say I want to throw in now a AC input module. It should now go in and add a field bus module since I'm switching from DC to AC. It added it automatically. So it'll go right through, and if for some crazy reason I wanted to do a configuration of one AC module and then do a DC output module right after, which I would not recommend, it'll throw another one to switch that bus back to DC. So it knows exactly how you're configuring it, so you don't have to worry about, okay, what do I need in between? You know, if I want to rearrange these modules, let's say I want to add insert slot after this OB8, I'm going to take this, drag it over to there. It'll just remove those the field bus modules and get you all configured, ready to go. Now, within the point I/O, you have the ability to change the terminal blocks. As a default, they're the 1-piece terminal blocks. So if you want the 2-piece terminal blocks, I can go in and right-click again on the image, go to Configure Chassis. And right down here at the bottom is Advanced Wiring Options. So if I click on that, I can go to each individual module and change the terminal. If I want a 2-piece 2-wire, 2-piece 3-wire, etc. If I want the whole project to be a single type of terminal, I can go down here where it says default wiring and go down to say I want 2-piece 2-wire and just apply defaults. And it changes it for all of the modules and hit OK. So across the board, everything is changed for you. Okay. And again, if you want to add additional banks onto your point I/O, you can do that. And if you want expansion cables, etc., it's all configured from this screen. Again, if I go up and hit this quick bill of material, it gives me again the bill of material in its position of the image that I'm looking at. If you notice here in the bottom, it says positional bill of material. If I want to consolidate it, I can do that. And there's consolidated bill of material. And I can go ahead and export that out to Excel if I like. Now that I have these two, if let's say I wanted to see the complete bill of material of the whole project itself, this bill of materials, it says project, this one on the left is quick bill of material. The one on the right is project bill of material. If I click on that, it'll just make sure I want to save it. Yes, I want to save it. It'll actually generate a bill of material of everything that's within this project. The L30ER and its components, the .AO and its components with list pricing and give you a total. Again, I can organize it by individual items. I can do consolidated, or I can do position. However I want to look at it, and I can export it out to Excel if I like. Any questions up to this point? Okay. So let's say this whole project maybe has 2 or 3 .io modules that are identical to this. I can go up here, the .io, right click and duplicate device, and then it will create a copy of it. I can right click on it and hit rename, and I can change it to, let's say, .io 2. Okay, so now I have 2 sets of the identical .io in this system, in this project. Now, I would recommend, if this is already going to be on a network, I would connect the network first before I do a duplicate, because let's say I add these 4 additional .io modules, then I'd have to go back to each one and add it to a network. But if I do that first, when I do a copy and paste, it'll already be at the network. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to right click on this and just delete it. And then go back to Compact Logics. And I'm going to right click on the processor and go connect to Ethernet IP network, connect to port 1. And if I want to go CPWE model, and this is a pre-structured type of configuration, which I do not use very often because everything's pretty unique. I like to do the freeform Ethernet IP. Then if you want to go back to a standalone switch, if you want to do a device level ring, or let's say you want to do a linear, both copper or fiber. So let's say I just, for conversation's sake, I go down and I want to do a linear because I picked dual port devices. So I pick linear, it gives you the Ethernet IP name, hit OK. What it did is over here, and I'm not sure if you can see how we switched over, we're now looking at the network that I've connected this controller to a linear Ethernet network. If I go back to hardware, I see this little image. As long as this is highlighted on the top, it says connections, that this is now connected to a network. If I uncheck this thing, it doesn't show that I'm connected to a network. Okay. And by the way, I can also, before I was right-clicking on this, going to configure chassis. You can also just hit this icon up here and hit configure chassis. Same way of getting to it. So now if I go over to .io, I can right-click on this, connect to Ethernet IP network. I can connect it to a new network or my existing one that I called Linear 001. And now it comes up and says it's connected. If you notice how this is kind of off the screen, each individual object, you can actually zoom in, zoom out, depending on how big your project is or how big your rack is. So this is underneath hardware. If I switch over to network, I now have an image of my network, and I can rearrange this and do whatever I want to kind of make it look decent for just for pictures and stuff like that. And you can show how you want this to look by clicking on these different icons up top. It'll change you how this will look. Any questions? I know I'm going pretty fast to try to get a lot of things covered here. So if I go back to hardware, let's say I want to go now add this, I can right click or duplicate this, right click, duplicate device, right click, rename, call it 002, right click, duplicate device, rename, call it 003. If I go back to my network, I now already have it configured as the network. The device is already configured as linear, okay, as the network itself. So that's why it's nice if you already have it, the first one connected to the network, and then you duplicate it, it configures it all for you at that point. Questions, comments? I can do this exact same thing with a network switch. Let's say if I go to a network and I'm just going to delete this network completely. All right. I just deleted everything, disconnected everything from the network. I can right click on this processor again, connect it to standalone switch. If I go back to my network configuration, it's now connected to the switch. If I go back to hardware, I can right click and it says connect to switch. Since I already have these there, I'm going to right click, connect to switch, and I'm just going to delete this 0.3 just to, so I'm not doing it again. So if I go back to hardware, or excuse me, network, now my devices are connected through a switch. If I right click on this switch, configure switch, I now have the ability to go in and tell which ports those devices are connected to. And that's kind of hard to see because there's so much information. If I want to change this switch, I can go to switch configuration. It's right now set up as a Stratix 5700. I can hit help me select. These are all different managed switches. Maybe this, since this project is so small, I can go to an additional unmanaged switch, and I just want to go to a small 8-port switch, hit OK. It's now set up as just a standard unmanaged 8-port copper switch. Okay, there's a lot of information here. You can configure it and do whatever you want. If I go over to action again, there's something called advanced communication details. And it brought up a tab on my other screen. I'm going to drag and drop. Now it'll tell you how much you are utilizing your network. Obviously, in this configuration with just one controller and 2.0 modules, you're not really doing much utilization. It's 2.1%. But if I go over to, let's just say, I/O devices, it says, okay, I've got these IQ16s, OW16s, these IB8s. I have them set up as rack optimized. My RPI is set as 20 milliseconds. Let's say for some crazy reason, I want to put this down to 3 milliseconds. Everything is faster than it, as default, because I want to get data faster over to my controller. I can speed these up, and then it'll come back and say, is my network capable of handling that response time that I'm looking for? Each of my devices, I have none assigned to this right now. If I was doing produce to consume tags, if I had 2 controllers in my configuration, I could be setting it up to send messages back and forth with produce consume tags. It'll tell you how much you're using there. Then you can look at logic. Let's say I've got, 1,000 rungs of program in here. And, I'm just giving you some rough ideas, and then errors and warnings. It says everything seems to be okay. It's saying missing or incomplete assignment. The reason why is I have no power going to these I/O modules. But as a result, if you notice, just by changing those few things, I'm now at 13.9% utilization just by changing my RPIs. But it'll tell me how many IP nodes I have, I have 14 remaining because this controller can handle 16 IP addresses. Gives you some information about packets per second, how many SIP connections. For rack optimized, it's got 4 remaining. For direct connections, he's got 31 remaining. So it's going through every little different configuration that you normally would have to calculate by hand. It tells you where you're at. So a lot of people call up and say, hey, if I put in an L33ER and I have 10 drives on it, how's it going to function? What's going to be my response time? You can definitely do that within this platform. And I notice I got a question. Are you able to import into RS Studio? Not at this time. We've had a lot of questions on that because it would be really nice to be able to take this configuration and bring it right into Studio 5000 and have all your IO trees and everything set up. That's not capable today. They've talked about it. We can do that with some other software packages. Okay, we've got the software called Architecture, but it doesn't do the self-diagnostics, and we can talk about that a little bit later if you'd like. But again, this goes over all the different configurations that you want. So let's say I want to discard my changes. I want to add a drive to this. So if I go Action, New Hardware, if I go down and hit a PowerFlex drive, where are we at? There we go, PowerFlex. Let's say I want to add a 525 to it. And I can select a 525, select that, hit OK. It actually launches, and I'm going to drag and drop another screen in here, something out of Proposal Works, and say I want 40 volt 3-phase. I want just a 4 amp motor, no filtering, and hit accept. I now have a drive on here. I can right click on the drive, connect it to my existing network again through that same switch. And now I have that configuration of that drive. And I can actually go back to Action, Advanced Communication Details. It always pops up on my other screen. Now, here it says it went back to 3.1 because I didn't save when I had everything set as a lower RPI. But now I can go through and it tells me the performance, what I would have to the drive also. So again, very useful software package. So any questions on this? Now again, this, we started a few minutes late, so I'm going to keep going for a few more minutes. I can go in and hit hardware, and I can hit Control Logics rack. I want, let's say, a 10-slot rack, hit OK. It brings up a Control Logics rack that I can do the same thing, drag and drop modules onto the system. If I want to add an HMI, I can do the same thing. Again, very useful in configuring a bill of material. If I delete this, you can also, if I go to File, I can export it out to our other software package called Proposal Works. I can export it out to PowerPoint. I can just create a report. And we have a lot of customers who do this, set things up, and then use these documents. And I'll show you that in a second what these errors were. We'll go in and it creates images of everything I just created. And give it a second here as it brings up the quote report. And I have, again, a lot of customers who utilize these within their drawings or when you're doing a proposal for somebody. You have all this information. So it's got all this, and then based off of what products you selected, it's got some, I don't want to say Rockwell fluff in it, but it's got some good information about what type of the product it was and compact logics, etc. But if we get down to the sort of the meat of the project, I'm going, get everybody dizzy. So it's saying here I didn't specify that it was assigned to a particular controller because I didn't get into that detail. But here's my network drawing. I could have cleaned it up within IAB. Here's my bill of material. Again, list price, positional bill of material. If I keep going, then I have, again, my network. Then all of a sudden I'll have, there's my Compact Logix configuration. And then I'll have my point IO configuration, all the different modules in there, what the power supply consumption's happening, et cetera. You got all this information in this report, and it's just an image. I can take this image now and put it into any type of document I want for your own use or for your customer's use. One of the things, if you use our on-machine wiring, the 1492 wiring system. Let's say I want to take this out and use our wiring system. I can do a right click on it and say add on machine. And then I can select my wiring tape. Do I want to go out to an IO ready cable, which is just open flying leads? And it comes up with the proper cable I need. And if I want 1, 2.5 or 5 meter cable, that comes up with a configuration of it's already attached to here. And you have just flying lead. But maybe I want to go down to our IO ready system. So I go to wiring system module and it comes up with the proper cable I need right here. And then if I want to go to, this one is just a regular output module with LED indicators. If I want to maybe change it to something else that's maybe fused, I can go in there and select that. Or if I can change custom length, whatever I want to do. But that automatically creates that bill of material, shows up on another image. If I go back to my hardware, I can see that it's connected to a pre-wired hard disk. Now, if I have a platform that this is not capable of doing that, I right-click and try to hit add on machine, it doesn't show up. Okay, so I just touched the surface of these the capabilities of the software. But the biggest thing that I think that can help you, it remembers all the different IO points or the parts that you don't realize that you need. Let's say if I picked Action New Hardware and I picked the 5069 controller, the 5380. If I add controller, so the L310, I go down and add an IO module. The IB16, just add a couple more of those just for, and I go to the bill of materials. It automatically added the terminal block, which is purchased separately. As a default, I picked the screw terminal block. If I go right click and hit, let's say I can configure chassis, I go advanced wiring and I change it to screw. Maybe I want it all to be spring or push in spring clamp. Apply, now it's all spring. Since you have to add a power supply to this family, I can hit this and I can pick a 5 amp power supply, hit OK. Now, if I start adding a whole bunch of IO modules on here, eventually this 5 amp power supply will be overtaxed. You'll get red errors over here on the right-hand side. So again, a lot of information. I covered a lot. If you got more questions, feel free to give me a call. We can set up, I can even come out to your facility and go over this in a little bit more detail. Again, a whole bunch of information you can get out of this platform and a complete bill of material. And by the way, the 5069 does not have on machine yet. If I right click, I can't add out on machine to it. Okay. If I notice, I can right click on any of these. It says remove modules, add favorites, or documentation. I can go, if I want the technical document, I can go right there. I can get a product overview from the website, or I can go to technical documents or anything else. If I just want technical documents, I can go here. It brings up documents. And it's actually bringing it up again on my other screen. It brought up just a selection guide on that automatically. If I right click on it, I can bring, let's do literature library. It'll go to the website and bring up all manuals or all information regarding that particular IO module. So it's really nice there that you can just grab information, right click it, and go it grabs information. Now you do still have to hit the search, but it'll come up when you do it. Okay. All right. I was a little bit over, 5 minutes over, but I wanted to cover the things I wanted to cover. But before we say goodbye, anybody have any questions? Again, I know it was a lot of information, a very short period of time. In the past, when we've had a lot of on-site stuff, we usually take a half a day to cover all this. But again, I'd be glad to come out to any of your facilities or even doing something over the phone and to cover a little bit more detail about having utilize this. Again, this is a free software package available to download off the Rockwell website, and it's free to use, and it's getting a lot of information. It's updated weekly with new products. If there maybe there's a bug in it or something like that, but it's updated weekly, and again, available for your use. So, any other questions for today?
Ben, I don't see any,
Nope.
any messages in the chat. I don't see any hands raised. So I do appreciate you sharing today. And as Thad mentioned, if anybody has any questions, please reach out to Thad or myself, and we'll make sure that we get you additional training or get your questions answered.
All right. Hey, thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, Thad. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.